Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says if he's elected, he would mandate life sentences for those convicted of trafficking, production, and distribution of more than 40 milligrams of fentanyl.
We must stop drugs to save our people and put Canada first. It starts with locking up mass traffickers and manufacturers of this poison with penalties that fit the crime. But what is that crime? Let's call fentanyl trafficking what it is: mass murder. Selling 40 milligrams of this poison is enough to kill 20 people. It's like spraying bullets into a crowd. You might not know who you're killing, but it's certain someone will die.
Poilievre also suggested there would be a 15-year sentence for traffickers convicted of selling fentanyl in smaller quantities, between 20 and 40 milligrams. Justice Minister Arif Virani issued a statement reacting to Poilievre's proposal, saying his proposed solution isn't just extreme, it's completely detached from reality. It would sentence thousands of often struggling and desperate fentanyl users to life behind bars, regardless of their medical condition. An absurd, unconstitutional approach that has no place in Canada. Joining me now to help us better understand this proposal is criminologist with the University of the Fraser Valley, Yvon Dandurand. Sir, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Pierre Poilievre says he is targeting kingpins with this proposed legislation. The Justice Minister has a different interpretation. How do you view who would likely get caught up in a law like this?
Well, it's not our first experience of that. You know, those mandatory prison sentences were very popular with conservatives during the Harper years, and we're trying to go back to this. But unfortunately, those measures were ineffective then, and they will continue to be ineffective. So Mr. Poilievre says that he's going after kingpins. Well, kingpins don't go around with 20 milligram of fentanyl in their pockets, or 40. Clearly, the people who are likely to be caught with that kind of quantity, minimum quantity of fentanyl around them in their person, in their possession, are going to be people who are in the lower rungs of criminal networks, people who are totally dispensable from the point of view of criminal operations, and oftentimes people who don't have a choice or people who are desperate and are trafficking at that level, low level, just to support their own habits. So in that sense, the Minister of Justice is right. I'm not sure to what point it's unconstitutional, but because I haven't heard this argument, but clearly right. It's at the very least, it's ineffective.
Okay, I'll get to the constitutionality in just a second, but I want to ask you about that 40 milligram amount. Look, according to the DEA and other things I've seen today, 2 milligrams of fentanyl can be deadly. So 40 milligrams has the potential to kill 20 people. You know, it is not obviously a safe product. I've covered some drug busts in my career, and it's always kilos of a product that is taken in. How much is 40 milligrams of fentanyl relative to a normal fentanyl trafficking operation? Because I've seen arrests with much larger numbers. What do you make of that being the threshold for life in jail?
Well, the numbers we have in mind when we're talking about drugs don't apply to fentanyl because fentanyl is extremely potent. Mm-hmm. So if you're talking about a gram of marijuana or cannabis, it's one thing. If you're talking about a gram of fentanyl, it's a very, very different thing. However, just to quote recent numbers, one of the big seizures that the law enforcement succeeded in accomplishing recently was 23 pounds, right? So what, 10 or 12 kilos or something like that.
Right.
And that was a mega seizure. So we're talking about very small quantities. However, oftentimes those drugs are mixed with others. So how you measure them, it's difficult because they're so potent. You need just a trace of fentanyl added to some other synthetic drug or any drug, and you have something very potent. So it's not as if people always go around with pure fentanyl on their person or in their house or in their vehicle. So it's hard to know exactly
right.
What 40 milligrams. You're right, I think, David, in saying that most studies say, well, 2 milligrams is enough for an overdose. It's not automatic, but it's possible to overdose. Hopefully, people don't use 2 milligrams when they are using. Part of the problem oftentimes is the people who are using don't know exactly what they're using. It's been mixed, it's been tempered with, it's been added with others, offered with other substances. So it's hard for people to know what they're consuming. It will also be hard for police officers to measure whether you got 20 milligrams or 22 milligrams. And I can bet you people on the street are going to make sure that they have less than 20 or less than 40, send two guys with 19 milligrams instead of one guy with 40. So, you know, it's a bit of a ludicrous kind of proposition, knowing how the market functions.
Right. It's interesting, though, you make the point that because of the potency, the smaller volumes matter more relative to other drugs in the conversation we normally associate with these things. But the life in prison as a minimum sentence, or as a mandatory sentence, excuse me, for if you're arrested with more than 40 milligrams, we have seen the Supreme Court strike down mandatory minimums before because they were too broadly applied, but left it open to the possibility that it could be applied if narrowly construed. Like there are mandatory minimums for murder and other different things in the Canadian Criminal Code. I wonder on this one, because Mr. Poilievre was asked today about the constitutionality of this, and he cited Section 7 of the Charter of Rights, which speaks to people's right to life and liberty, and said that because the Charter guarantees the right to life, this would be a Charter-compliant legal proposal. Your sense is that how this works?
Well, maybe in Mr. Poilievre's mind, but it's a stretch to say that. Of course, the right to life is threatened every day. You drive a car, you drink alcohol, whatever. All of those things can possibly interfere with your life, right? So it's not a very strong argument, but it's a popular argument. Probably that will be seen positively by a big segment of the population, but legally, I don't think that this is, is a strong leg to stand on legally.
So, I mean, also that section, also the right to liberty is there, right? And it collides, and this is why there is bail, for example, in Canada. So there's a collision of rights there. So just as a final point, do you think this would survive a court challenge? Because I suspect a mandatory life sentence would be challenged by civil liberties groups.
Well, judges absolutely hate those. The main reason for this is because it moves the discretionary authority from the sentencing judge to the prosecutors or the police, where there's a whole lot less oversight. So judges unanimously don't like those because they're powerless. They basically have to apply the sentence automatically. However, it depends, to answer your question directly, it depends on how this thing is formulated in the law. It is possible to have mandatory minima. As you mentioned, we have saved a few, but it depends on how this is formulated in the law. And basically now we have the benefit of previous court decisions. So if Mr. Poilievre was in power and directed the Ministry of Justice to draft something, I know that it would try to address the issues that have been already settled in the Supreme Court. Right,
and just for people watching at home, judges can give life sentences for trafficking of substances like fentanyl for that category and that class of drugs. They're just discretionary. They're not mandatory. Yvon Dandurand, thank you for joining us, criminologist with the University of the Fraser Valley. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Good night.